Welcome back for part 3 of my discussion with Dr. David Moskowitz, principal at 8VC. I'm Dr. Daniel Haters, executive chairman at Model Medicines. David, for part 3 of our discussion, we're going to discuss how Model Medicines fits into the 8VC BioIT portfolio, and then dive a little bit deeper into Model Medicines as a company, including its partnerships, the success of the platform in discovering drugs recently, and get your thoughts on what's next for the company. In part 2 of our discussion, you described 8VC's BioIT portfolio. Now I would love for you to speak about Model Medicines as a cheminformatics-based AI drug discovery company within that BioIT portfolio. Specifically, I'm interested to understand your thinking of how Model Medicines fits into the big picture of what 8VC is investing in within this space.
Well, it's an interesting question because therapeutic investing historically has been the domain of very traditional life science investors, right? I mean, I think, the history is littered with examples of great therapeutics companies being created as a function of extremely deep consideration of highly specific domains of biology and really delving very deeply into the particulars of a specific pathway in its biology and how that relates to the accessibility of a target and a single asset on top of that. And for that reason, it has been, I'd say, a little bit tough, or at least it was in the early days, for people who are coming more from the tech side to think about the right way to invest in therapeutics. And I think where the field converged relatively early on is that the best way to think about things is more around the platform perspective. And how do we invest not in individual assets, but in real engines of discovery, in places where we know that there is going to be some repeatable underlying methodology that can lead to the turning of a flywheel that then creates large numbers of assets where, even if they're distinct biologically, have at their core some unifying element that enables them to be uniquely, accessibly discovered by that underlying piece of tech. And a lot of what we think about at 8VC is, well, what are the different ways in which technology can interface with therapeutic discovery? And where I'd say Model Medicines fits in particular in there is the idea of reducing certain problems in biology to problems of engineering directly. And I think for a firm like ours, which is so grounded on the tech side of things, that's actually where we're best suited to play and to evaluate and to help companies grow. Because I think we really understand the particulars as it comes to how do you build out the right tech infrastructure to ensure that you're moving your discovery engine as quickly as possible. And I think what Model Medicines has done a fantastic job of, again, is in thinking about how do we change these complex problems of biology and create problems of engineering that can be attacked much more expediently. And I think it's been a phenomenal journey on that front thus far.
David, I appreciate that comment. I think that you just hired yourself into a leadership role at Model Medicines. You just explained what we do and how we do it better than I could have. We recently created a partnership with Sanford Burnham and specifically with Dr. Sumit Chanda, one of the world's foremost virologists. And in that partnership dovetails with what you were just speaking about. No startup can be a vertically integrated pharmaceutical company from launch or overnight. However, Model Medicines did bring certain traits and started with certain advantages as compared to the rest of the pharmaceutical world as it exists today. In our partnership with Dr. Chanda and SBP, we met a world-leading PI that was churning out data related to the COVID-19 virus, discovering new broad-spectrum antiviral targets completely unknown to the rest of the world that, if drugged, could lead to the creation of broad-spectrum therapeutics for this pandemic, influenza, and future pandemics all at the same time. However, Sumit ran into an issue. Even though he could generate fundamental data that would identify these novel drug targets, the data was not actionable in a time frame small enough to respond to the current pandemic. It was only actionable over scales of time measured in decades and with capital measured in the billions of dollars.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful story. I think a lot of the lessons of the early applications of informatics in healthcare were exactly what you're describing, which is to say, I think people early on, maybe in the 70s, we're looking at computers as the next big thing in medicine and saying, well, they can just replace doctors outright. And what they discovered fairly quickly was actually the best way to utilize them was in combination with the top minds. And that by virtue of that synergy, that you could get superior results as compared to what was possible with either alone. And I think that's exactly what you're describing. We're in this period now. And I'm not sure if I see things changing that soon. We're in this period where the best results are going to come from combining the best tech with the best people. And I think that's exactly the lesson that you're describing here. And going back to the idea that we discussed previously of how biology and science has up until now been rate limited largely by hands in the lab, what you can think about is accelerating those efforts with technology while still being fed in the great ideas that the great labs are continuing to generate. And to your point, I think that's exactly what we're going to need more of to ensure that we can respond quickly to emerging threats as has happened over the last year with the global pandemic.
Our partnership with Sanford Burnham and Sumit was exactly about the point you just made, i.e. taking the tools and the platform that we had created, partnering with global leaders creating foundational data sets that previously were not actionable on the timescale to be important for this pandemic, but when combined with our platform, allowed that data to be actionable with potential to bring drugs to market for this pandemic and certainly before the next pandemic. Here, I think we see this combination of the old world and the new world. And at the same time, I'm interested if you could speak about this concept from your point of view as an investor. We're in a period where data and software can't do everything on its own, but by partnering with the great labs of the world, Model Medicines is able to do something that wasn't previously possible on timescales to create products that can impact human life and human health in days rather than decades. I appreciate that you're a kindred spirit here with the way that you look at this. We were quite honored to be able to partner with global scientific leaders like Dr. Chanda and be supported by global leaders in venture capital like you and 8VC. I agree with you. It's going to take basic science plus technology to get global healthcare and the pharma industry where we all know it needs to be. Patients are dying today and suffering today. You don't have the luxury of thinking 10 years out if you're in an ICU bed today. I'm excited that you and 8VC as a firm share our goal of creating therapeutics to solve rare diseases and diseases with high unmet medical need like COVID-19 today. With that, we'll conclude part 3 of our discussion. We'll come back for part 4, where I look forward to discussing the future of model medicines, other companies in your BioIT portfolio, and the BioIT space generally. Specifically, how do we go from a world of edgy startups that are pushing the bounds of what's possible in healthcare, life sciences, and AI, to these companies starting to IPO and become strategic players in their own right? And then, more specifically, I'd like to get your insight on the future of AI in drug discovery and AI in the pharmaceutical space in general. I look forward to part 4 of our discussion, David. Thank you.